joined our sessions before around database audit and assessment, about a month ago we did a ins and outs of database audit and assessment. We went a little bit further into detail around certain things to check for within the database and things like that. This webinar here is going to talk a little bit around the takeaways from that webinar. So what are really the top tips of doing that? And we'll really focus in on that. So as we get started, let's a couple of housekeeping items. As you know, if you've joined us before, or if you have not joined us, go to webinar is really simple. You can participate today. You can open and close your panel. You could submit text questions that Jeff will be able to see and bring them up to speed at the end of the presentation. You can raise your hand, which you've all done for testing the audio sound, and you'll receive an email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view this recorded session today. So without further ado, let's get started on top tips of database audit and assessment. So I have 5 things laid out here, and we're going to dive into each of them first, and then we're going to take a little deeper look on how to look at this with the solution today. So we have don't shy away as number 1 top tip. Number 2, plan accordingly. Number 3, automate what you can. Number 4, go beyond traditional audit. And number 5, report meaningful metrics. So first we're going to start with don't shy away. So why is that a top tip for database audit assessment? A lot of the times when we talk to people in the audit community, in the IT audit community, in consulting community, sometimes even they're just risk assessment, you ask them are you doing database audits or assessments? Typically, the answer is no, or we do, but very small bit of a time. We do it, in our audit cycle. It doesn't happen every year or that often. So the first thing that you want to do is make the database a critical component to any IT audit. We all know, we've all heard the stories, we've all read the newspapers that databases are a central point of attack for hackers. And a lot of the ways they're getting into databases is because there are controls there that are just not audited, and controls that are actually weak, where we can strengthen in an audit practice. So number 1, make the database a critical component to any IT audit. You want to include the database as part of your regular application audits. I know we do, SAP audits or ERP application audits fairly regularly, a little bit more than we would do, but make sure you know that that database is there to support the overall application architecture. So if we don't include the database as part of our regular application audits, we're missing a key component to understand how things could potentially be bad. So as part of the overall access control of what you're looking at the application, if you're determining to see if these users only have specific payroll roles, so they have that system, or they have accounts payable, accounts receivable, all that stuff that's within the application. You should also try to include, not all the time, but you want to include it as part of the regular audits, maybe not every single time, but at least a portion of the time to include the database. Number 3 is don't let the lack of database knowledge become an issue. I know many in the space of IT audit typically don't look at databases because there's just a lack of knowledge. That should not become an issue. There's tons of information out there. There's tons of audit programs developed by things like ISACA and MIS training, SANS Group. They all have these types of training programs that allow you to learn a little bit more about the database control system and how to particularly audit it. There's also tools out there that you can use that don't really need you to have that database knowledge to proceed with an audit in your audit program. So that's number 3. Number 4 is don't let the database administrator become a roadblock. A lot of the times that you talk to people, they say, yeah, the database administrator doesn't want to let us touch their database, or they're saying, we can't do this during business hours because I need to do other things. It's a critical application, critical database. We have to maintain high performance and things like that. Don't let them become a roadblock. We're checking audit controls that should not be in the way of the overall high performance that's needed at the database. So those are the 4 things about don't shy away. You want to make sure it's part of a critical component of any IT audit. You want to make sure you're doing it as part of your application audits because a database is part of that application stack and that application tier. You don't want to let the lack of database knowledge become an issue, and don't let the DBA become a roadblock. What do you do next? You want to plan accordingly, and that's where you're going to need a little bit of research or a little bit of guidance on where to go. So when you talk about plan accordingly, we talk about understanding the scope. When you look at your database environment or you're looking at your infrastructure environment, there's certain things that you need to look at. You probably look at maybe a system within a financial institution that processes a lot of trillions of dollars. That might be something that it's in scope for a review. Okay, what databases support that? What database type does it support that? Is that a Sybase? Is that an Oracle? Is that a DB2? Is that a Microsoft SQL Server? Understand the actual database type and understand the version. Why do we need to understand the type and version? Because there's all these different vendors are set up differently. The main controls that you might want to look at are you need to look specifically at them at each individual vendor. Version specific as well. So if you're looking at versions, something in Oracle 9i is definitely different in Oracle 11g. There's different ways that are parameters are set. New parameters might have been introduced that are more secure, that allow for more security, that you need to assess to see if they're enabled or disabled, is it good or bad, and things like that. The operating system is also one of those things that you need to also understand. A database sitting on a Solaris box versus a Windows box, there are different operating system interactions between the database and the OS that might be potentially something that you need to investigate. You need to understand what application does it support. So, if it's supporting an SAP environment, you might know a little bit more about what you want to do. So if it's a SAP with the database that's supporting it, you might know the specific underlying tables that you want to actually look at to see who has access to, if you're doing an access control review there for users, database users specifically. Lastly, you want to understand how the data flows in and out of the database through the application, because all those different measures, when you're doing your process of understanding how data flows with the audit, you're going to want to understand how that works with the database specifically, because there's certain things that you might need to check for. Is network encryption turned on? Is there actually encryption on the database? Is that a requirement? How are we handling access to certain data within the database? Are we using dynamic data masking, or do we have just production data in our development databases? Those things are all the things that you need to consider about understanding the scope. The next thing that you want to do, again here, if we talked about number one, don't shy away, don't let the DBA become a roadblock. Well, if you plan accordingly, that's not going to happen. You want to partner with your database administrator for this audit process and assessment process. You want to make them comfortable about the process of what's going to happen. Depending on your approach to how you want to look at a database, there might be a longer approach where you might be asking the administrator to run some scripts. It might be something where you're asking them to set up an account to run a tool. It might be where you're asking them specific questions about their backup procedures and their other procedures of what they do with the database. You want to make them comfortable about the process. You might need them to take screenshots of certain things. So they have to be involved, and they have to be comfortable with what you're asking for them to actually take ownership with you as far as the audit. You also want to assure them that the process will not interfere with the database performance. That's one of the things that's going to cause the roadblock. So if you partner with them, you show them, hey, these are the this is the actual audit work plan that we're talking about. These are the things that we're going to actually check for. These are the scripts that I've developed, or this is the tool I'm going to use. So let's plan accordingly together with the database administrator. Next, we talk about, in planning accordingly, allocating the appropriate resources. Okay? There are a bunch of controls that we need to audit. We need to understand what's our baseline. Where do we get information for us to actually help us understand what we need to do? Do I need to take a course? Do I need to go on Google and find a bunch of things that I need to check for? Do I need to talk to a colleague? Do I need to talk to my peers at an ISACA meeting, things like that? So there's certain things out there, right? There is the CIS, which is the Center for Internet Security Benchmarks, which help you understand certain things that you should be looking at, certain controls that you should be looking at the database. And they've broken it out by different database versions, database vendors, so you have an understanding of the certain things that we had to look at. I mean, that's one of the things that we talked about with understanding the scope, what database type, what database version, and operating system. So CIS Benchmark can help you there. They have specific guidance that you can look at. You could either choose to run the entire program as far as what they do, or pick and choose the things that you find important to actually lock down and look at. There are ISACA programs. There are, plenty of ISACA chapter meetings do have database-focused programs where you can talk about database audit, things like that. There are the DISISTIGs, which are the Defense Information Systems Agency Security Technology Implementation Guides. Those can be very heavy as far as what you want to look at, but there are some great things in there they should be considering to add to your baseline. When you talk about ITIL, yes, there are high-level things there that you could also apply down to the database level. So those are the things that you should really consider around allocating appropriate resources as far as what you need to handle and actually do. You need to also understand when you're looking at appropriate resources, can we do this with our current staff, right? What do we need to do to do this database audit and assessment? Do we have an internal subject matter expert? Obviously, we don't want to ask the DBA because, we want to maintain a segregation of duties between what they do and what we're actually controlling for. But do we have someone that came in, a recent hire that did this, or is there something that we could do there? Can we use a tool to actually help us do the actual assessment work, gathering data from the database, helping us crunch out what it means, and pretty much working it there? Do we need to contract a subject matter expert? Do we need to go to an outside firm to bring someone in to do this thing? So these are all part of allocating the appropriate resources as far as what we want to do and how we're going to staff it to make sure our audit work plan for our database is executed to a T and we're not wasting any time and money and obviously resources. So that's planning accordingly. Once again, it's understanding the scope, partnering with your DBAs, and allocating the appropriate resource. So what's next as far as the top tip? We talked about don't shy away. You got to do it. It's one of those things that we should be doing and getting it into our programs. Once we've accepted the fact that we have to do it and got it into our program, we plan accordingly. The next thing that you want to do, once you've planned accordingly, hopefully you can automate what you can. So let's talk a little bit about that. What can you do when automating what you can? So we've understood that we could look to a lot of different guidances out there. We mentioned CIS Security Benchmark for one of those places to look at. But in our process, right, do we want to do an interview-only type of audit? Sometimes a process-based interview only will not yield meaningful results. What do we mean by that? Well, if we just ask questions based upon sometimes the highest level controls that we look at the frameworks of COBIT or ITIL or things like that. Sometimes we take the approach where we're talking about just about the control. We ask the question, and then we try to have an answer, right? But it doesn't yield meaningful evidence that can really support a reason why this is an audit that's going to pass or fail or something like that. So interview only can get a little bit wary as far as what we can gather back to have something meaningful. What about scripts? So when you're dealing with scripts and you're dealing with a database and you're not a subject matter expert, you don't come from a database background, things like that. A lot of the time in IT audit, we're not coming from a database background. Do we have the expertise to provide the independent scripts to the administrators to bring us back the correct data to review? Oftentimes not. We have to find a subject matter expert. We have to go work with a outside firm that might have subject matter expertise to bring them in to develop this program. Because obviously we don't want to ask the DBA just to give information. We need to have that independent validation of the data that we're collecting and use that as evidence to whatever control that we're trying to identify if it's good or bad, pass or fail. Do we have the expertise just to review the raw query data, even if we do have the scripts, right? If you're trying to find out if some certain data points on a parameter setting and we ask them to run a query and it comes back to true or false or 0 or 1, do we know what that actually means? in when we're actually running that. There's no context there when we're actually doing that, unless we've built the context into this script goes to this control and things like that. So scripts, just using scripts alone can be hard. What about a tool? And tool we're going to talk a bit later today as far as the App Detective, and we're going to talk also, if make sure you remain on the call, about how you can get App Detective and a free 1-year license if you're interested in that. So there's our tools out there. You want to use an automated best-of-breed type of product to help you get the information that you want to bring that into your process. So you'll use a tool, and you also have an interview process, because we know we have to understand how the tool output impacts the actual business. So now we talked about automation. Let's talk about going beyond traditional audit. And we talked a little bit about that in interview. You know, interviewing is sometimes more of a traditional audit and things like that when you're considering an IT infrastructure audit. So what do we mean by go beyond traditional audit? Traditional audit at the high level might miss something critical. You know, if we just ask the same questions about a database, or we talk about database programs and things like that, we might miss something inherently specific to that database version, that database type, and that database sitting on an operating system. We might miss something that we should be looking at, things like that. Databases have complex settings and can vary. Those are the things that we're going to miss by just going at your traditional audit. Now, what do I mean by traditional audit? You're more process control driven. It's a lot more general. You have a smaller set of controls to review, and you're typically going through the motions at times when you're doing just a general audit. But if you add a security audit context or security assessment context with your audit program, you'll be able to probably yield a lot better results that support the actual real business risk when you're doing an audit. So you want to be more specific to that technology, as we talked about. We need to answer, are we secure, and what's the risk? You know, we want to understand how does this affect our confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are more of the things that you hear from your security officer than generally on the audit side. But these are the same things that we need to apply, right? We're all looking at a database for a reason, a little bit differently from all the different stakeholders, but we should all consider these things, therefore we can have a coherent program. So if you think about a traditional audit, in the audit sense, there might be a control that we need to look at passwords, right? And there might be a control that says, let's just examine if the password length is set to 8 characters. So we can do that, right? We could just, talk to the administrator or whatever we need to do, or run a tool to check if it's set to 8. There might be a setting within the actual database that says, minimum password is set to 8 characters. And that's one thing. But if it's just set to 8 characters and we don't understand that specific database controls, what other database controls are on there, we might miss things, right? Because if it's just set to 8 characters, anybody can use a particular brute force dictionary attack method and try to brute force into it, right? So you need to understand some other things, and that's where it gets down to the specifics of individual database types and versions. If we add our security assessment hat on as part of our audit process, you might want to also examine if failed login attempts is enabled and what is it set to. Because if failed login attempt is set on, that means we can't, if they try to do a brute force attack, well, the login attempts are going to fail if they're using a single user, and once they get to whatever number that is, maybe it's 3, then their attempts are going to fail to actually log in. It's going to stop right there. I need to examine if password complexity is turned on. Okay, 8 characters is fine. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now that's a weak password, right? Is there password complexity setting in this specific database I'm looking at? Is it turned on? And what is that actual complexity setting? That's one thing that we should examine as well. And then you want to examine if the password length is set to 8 characters. Your original actual control you wanted to do, but there are things that you need to really understand about each specific database. Does it have failed login attempts? Does it have password complexity? Because those are the things I also want to add to the actual overall password control, to also password length is set to 8 characters. So that's where you can go beyond your traditional audit. If you think a little bit specifically, adding your little security hat on sometimes, more risk-based approach rather than just process-based. Let's look at the actual risk. talked about don't shy away, talked about plan accordingly, automate what you can, and go beyond traditional audit. And finally, when you get to the report, you want to report meaningful metrics. And what does that mean? So you want to have something that's, obviously executive summary, and you want to give your observations. But you want to include interesting details because who's going to ultimately going to get the report? The audit committee, your actual business owner. So what does all the information mean? So if we went the route and used a tool, or we did something more technical, we planned accordingly and said, we have specifically this Sybase system, or we have specifically this Oracle system. So we're going to specifically look at the controls for this Oracle, 10G system, and we know we have some password controls that we want to look at. We have some different things that we want to look at. We want to take that information and bubble it up to something meaningful. So here's an example of what you might have. Severity high, your testing arena was internal, or your area was internal. A brief description. Here we should just talk about insufficient security patch levels could be found on Oracle that could lead to remote exploit execution. That's a real nice brief description that tells exactly what the actual problem is. If there's references that you have there, these are all technical CVE references. CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. So there's certain vulnerabilities that can be exploited if you're not up to the correct patch level. You want to identify your systems that were affected. If it's the actual Oracle database, you want to put this Oracle supports this SAP system. What are the technical risks so they can understand? Potential vulnerabilities remain if you remain unpatched or not up to the latest patch. What's the business risk? Unauthorized access to system and data. Anybody could take these vulnerabilities and exploit them to actually get unauthorized access to the system. And what are your steps to resolve? Okay, you want to consider reviewing the implementation of patching policies. Okay, what's our actual patching policy? So the business actually takes ownership and knows that we have to change our patching policy. We're way behind where we should patch right away. Or if it's not patched right away, if we can't patch right away, what are we doing in place of when we can't have a patch available? So you want to enforce the policies of periodic system patching. You want to, especially for critical systems that have internet exposure, if it's out there. Estimated level of effort to mitigate would be low. Okay, you just have to apply a patch, right? Applying a patch is technically low risk, but you have to understand all the business risks. Here we're putting low as a technical risk. You could change it to whatever you want. You could have estimated level of effort to mitigate for technical, estimated level to mitigate it, business-wise. If we actually patch this, is it going to break our system? Do we have to go through a whole cycle and things like that? So that's where we talk about report meaningful metrics, because your actual person that's going to be looking at it is typically your audit committee or your business owner that you're going to report to, and they need to know, what do we need to do? You don't want to just report, we have all this output, and here you go, give it to administrator. That's fine and dandy because the administrator actually has to do the work to mitigate, but for the actual business owner, you have to report it in a good fashion there. So let's talk about using App Detective Pro if we were going to use this as an automated tool. We're not shying away. We planned accordingly, and planning accordingly, we chose a tool, and we want to automate what we can. So let's jump into what we can do with App Detective here, and I'll bring up App Detective for you to understand what the tool can do. So we talked about automating things, and we talked about CIS security benchmarks and things like that. So if you're not familiar with that, I'll bring up a spreadsheet here as far as the things that CIS does, right? So CIS, again, it's CIS, Center for Internet Security. They publish things out there. And here for Oracle, they publish, about 10 or 11, maybe even 12 different categories of things to look at. So if we look out here, there's things like Oracle parameter settings. These are the certain things that I was talking about for Oracle version. This is for Oracle 9i and 10G. They have actual parameters that can be set to true. It talks about why is this something that it should be looked at. Default is set to false. It should be set to true, okay? The default is set to 150. You should have max enabled rules to 30. So this is where the specific guidance these things can do, right? These are the things that you can pick and choose what you want to do, understand why you want to choose it with the comments here, so this is all available for you to digest and investigate. But when you jump into the product, you have ways to investigate this within policy. So as part of your planning accordingly process, once you've determined that, hey, App Detective is the thing for me, and maybe I'm using CIS, for example. Well, you know that App Detective has a CIS policy here. So CIS benchmark audit. But maybe we want to customize that even more for our environment. So what I would do is take this, I would do view selected, I would save it as my own policy, therefore I can actually customize it for my environment. So I'll do a save as, I'll call it CIS custom, and I'll go ahead and save that, and then I will take whatever I thought was smart for me to do in my audit program for CIS benchmark and customize it with the tool. So once it's saved here, say I'm looking at Oracle, right? And I have various different things here. I want to look at admin restriction flags not set. That's one of the things I want to look at, so I'm going to keep that included. Maybe core dump desk parameter is one of those things I don't need. It was deprecated in 11. Okay, that's good. Well, I have an 11G database that I'm actually going to audit for. So let me remove that. So that's removing it, simply removing it from a particular check. So App Detective really allows you to fine-grain, say, yes, I want to check, or no, I don't want to check. And then specifically, something like create library privilege. Now, create library privilege, if you need to understand what it means, the tool gives you that information. So we talked about don't let, and don't shy away, don't let the lack of database knowledge become an issue. Well, if you use a tool like App Detective, you have a wealth of information about every single thing that we check for, understand why we check for it, what are the risks associated if it comes back as a finding, and you have all that information right from the tool. You want to make sure that you're using it as part of your entire planning phase and your automation phase of an audit. So create library filters. We understand what it is. Maybe this is where we partner with our DBA to choose the actual policy, some of the things that they might know or have documented as exceptions of actual users. So let's take this, for example. Create library privilege. We're going to find all accounts and roles that have system privilege, create library privilege, or create any privilege. Well, maybe we know there's an exception. We know that anybody granted to DBA role should have this particular privilege. So we can create an exception in the tool. So I can go ahead, hit exception. I can go ahead and add a granted to DBA. And I could say, if I run this check against this Oracle database, if I see it's granted to DBA, I'll ignore it because that's an exception I have. But I want to document that in my output. So I'll go to risk acceptance. I'll say, yeah, I'm the creator. I'll say I'm the creator, Mark. And maybe there's an authorizer. Maybe Jeff is my authorizer. Maybe there's some internal mapping control number that I might have. And I'll put comments. I'll just say, anybody with DBA role is accepted to have trait library privilege within our company. And I can add the comments there, hit OK, and then add it. And then once I spit out my report, I'll have that information in my report that says there's an exception for DBA role, and this is why we have it here, things like that. So that all is part of my evidence for my audit report. So if we look at that, we talked about specifically around password checking and things like that. So those things, the failed login attempts is one of those things as an example I showed. So maybe it should be set to 3, is what CIS is saying. Maybe internally we say it should be set to 5. Whatever we want it to check for, we can specifically customize our policy so we have report output that is going to give us meaningful data for evidence that we're going to ultimately use for our reporting metrics that are meaningful to our business user. So maybe I'll hit save, and then when I'll actually go and run it, I'll go ahead and do so. So once I've figured that all out, I'll do that. I'll close that out, things like that. I'll start up my session, so I'll hit new. I'll start my session, and I'll go about running the tool App Detective. That will go out. From there, I'll have databases that I want to scan. So maybe here is an Oracle 9i database that I want to scan, and I'll have results, right? I run the results. I run the audit. I talk to my administrator. I have results. So I have 40 actual findings here that I want to report on. So there's a couple different ways I can report on the findings within the tool. I can get the raw results here for 40. For this specific scan, I'll do a vulnerability details report, and everything that comes out of the tool is a vulnerability or an issue. So I could say, hey, I had 33 high, I had 7 medium, and I'm going to take this report, I'm going to export it, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that to a PDF and give that to my administrators, and then I'll also create a format in Word format or Excel format because I'm going to take that data to provide that meaningful report to my actual business unit. Or I might want to say, I want to take this data and bring it to a CSV right away. So, and I want to filter it out. Okay, so I'm going to go here, edit vulnerability management. I'm going to say, hey, I want to look at the details of this. I want to go ahead and add a filter. I want to specifically look for my highs because that's the only thing I want to actually tell my audit committee about. The lows and mediums are fine for the administrators to understand, but in my meaningful report, I want to show the results for the high. I have 33 high here from what I selected, and maybe I want to include all these. I'll go ahead and export this out to a CSV file, and I'll say, all I care about is the risk, the actual vulnerability, the application. I don't even need the IP address and the details. So I'll export that, and that will go to a CSV file, and then I can take that and use that for my meaningful data. So those are the things the tool can easily do. You pick your policy, you get data out of it, and you're off and running. Simple things that you can automate as far as planning accordingly and getting your automation. And it's also going beyond your traditional audit because we're specifically looking at each individual database uniquely. We're looking at an Oracle 9i database, or we're looking at a Sybase 12.5 database, and obviously these things are the checks are unique to the specific database type. Well, there's also something that I need to understand. In my audit process, I talked about knowing the environment, understanding the scope. What does the application support? So if I was doing it for an HR application, I've included the database in there. I want to understand who has rights to my HR employee table because that's one of the things I just need to know. So I can run a report with a user rights review component that specifically is going to tell me who has access to a table in my database. So I'll go ahead and choose Object Access, and I'll look at it. This was the Oracle database I was looking at. I want to choose a specific table from the results I've already collected, and I want to say, there's an HR employee table, and I need to know who has access to it because I want to go to my business owner, my application owner, have an interview process. Again, it's still part of your normal audit process to have these conversations, and go ahead and figure out if there's actual issues so I can provide meaningful metrics back to the audit committee. So I could say HR employee. I could say, go ahead and run me a report. I'll take this report, print it out, email it over to my application owner, and say, okay, these are the actual database users that have access to this HR employees table. Okay, there's a CTX sys, which is a default Oracle user. Do they really need access to that? Is it going to break the application? Do you need to bring your application developer over to explain to you why we have CTX sys? Well, DBA role has it. Okay, that's fine, but do they really need insert, select, or update? Maybe they just need update or something on that table. So these are the things that allow you to have that entitlement, user entitlement questions with the application owner. We see the HR user has access to it. Okay, is that the application user? That's fine. But we see a bunch of other users here, actual employees here. Do they need these specific accesses here? And if they do, let's understand if they do or do not. And if they don't, do we need to interrogate the particular user to find out all the access they have into it, or do we need to run another report? So user rights review allows you to look at specific data components of your database to understand the actual access rights there. Also, essentially part of your audit review process. There's things within CIS that ask you to look at specific views. So user rights review, object access, you could look at specific views to see who has access to that, things like that. But this is where App Detective comes into play as far as automation and things like that, as far as the overall process. We're at about 37 minutes in, so I said we'll be around 40-45 minutes. So we're going to go ahead back to the presentation and wrap up and understand how you can go ahead and get App Detective for a year for a free license. So to summarize everything again, we talked about top tips for database audit and assessment. Specifically, you don't want to shy away from doing it. It's one of those things that should be a necessity within your audit program. You want to make the database a critical component to any IT audit. You want to include databases as part of regular application audits. Or if you're not doing that, make sure you've talked with your application development, your security team. What are they doing? You might want to audit that process and tell them that they should be using App Detective. You don't want to let the lack of knowledge of database knowledge become an issue, and you don't want to let your database administrator become a roadblock. You want to plan accordingly. You want to understand exactly what's going on. What database types do we have? What database versions do we have? What operating systems do they sit on? What applications do they support? And how does the data flow in and out of the database? And what do we need to add to our audit program as far as following the process? To not let the DBA become a robot, we want to partner with them and get an understanding with them that it says, hey, we're looking at these specific things. We're not going to bother you as far as your performance issues, but we are going to talk to you about certain things, how the database is configured and things like that. When you plan accordingly, you also want to allocate your appropriate resources. So hopefully the webinar here today will get you to look at a specific tool, being App Detective, if you want to add that into your program as a resource for you to use. You want to automate what you can. Obviously, the tool will help you do that, and if you're not going to do that, understand the best way that you can do that as far as automation to get very deep into the security configuration if you need to. You want to go beyond your traditional audit. You don't want to just ask, is the password length set to 8? You want to understand specifically if this is an Oracle 11G, do I have failed login attempts? Do I have password complexity turned on? And then I want to also know if the password length is set to 8. And lastly, you want to report meaningful metrics. You want to report these findings that you have as raw data as evidence, but use the evidence to clearly state what the actual business risk is, what the technical risk is, and what's the actual level of effort to mitigate for that. So lastly, we come to the introductory offer, no-cost one-year license. And for this, we have a process here. If you go to this web link that you have here, info.appsecinc.com/AppDetectivePro, $1 million fund, we are actually giving away App Detective to help you get started with your database audits. We're offering a one-year no-cost license. All you have to do is fill out the form there. You'll get a notice from a representative, and there are some restrictions there. It's valid to new accounts, so if you never purchased App Detectives from us before, you may be eligible for the program, but there are other restrictions may apply as well. So those are the things that we have available for you today. We hope that this webinar gave you some top tips for database audit and assessment. And with that, I'll throw it back to Jeff to see if there's any questions that may have come on.
Thanks, Mark. Just a reminder, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, just use the questions box, type your question in, and we'll go ahead and try to address that here. We've got a couple that have come in. We have a couple of minutes, so we'll address those. I guess I'll take the first one, Mark. It's kind of more of a housekeeping one. Several questions came in around the availability of the recording of this webinar. I know that a lot of you have requested that to either share the recording with colleagues or maybe you want to review something later on. And the answer is yes, we will have a recording available. It will be out within about 24 to 48 hours. Just look for an email with a link to that recording in the next day or two. So that's the first question. Another question comes in around kind of our products, Mark. I'll let you jump in on this one. And it's around we own DB Protect. How can I use App Detective Pro with DB Protect, and would the offer apply to us?
So as far as the offer, that all comes, the free 1 year license offer, that all comes down to just giving us a call and seeing how that will potentially work. But App Detective and DB Protect, we have many customers that have both of them within their organization. You have App Detective really as your tactical scanner. So we have folks that an IT audit department might use App Detective, or they just have scan people that use App Detective, where they have DB Protect in an operational setting, depending on what modules you got from us. If it's activity monitoring, if it's vulnerability assessment, that can be controlled by one group, and App Detective can be controlled by a different group or by the same group. It all depends on how you want to use it. If there are certain air pocket parts of your organization where you need to actually bring in media there and run a scan, App Detective is the perfect thing to do that. So just give us a call to your account rep, and we'll make sure we have the proper conversation to make sure that you're helped out with your needs for database audit and assessment.
Great. Next question is around database support. So what databases do you support with App Detective Pro, and do you work with cache databases?
So we work with most of the large relational database systems. We don't specifically work with cache database, but we do support Oracle 8i through 11g R2. We support Microsoft SQL Server 2000 through 2008 R2. We are looking to support also SQL Server 2012 this year as well. We support MySQL, 4.0 all the way up to 5.5. We support Sybase, ASE, Adaptive Server Enterprise 11.9.2 all the way up to the latest, 15.5, 15.7 I believe is the latest. Then you have IBM DB2 8.1 through 9.7, and then we also have IBM DB2 on the Z platform, the mainframe we support as well. And we also support something that folks have a lot of. They still do a lot of data development on is Lotus Notes Domino. So we also support that as well.
Great. Next question. I see that you can do a lot of vulnerability management with App Detective Pro. What about on, do you have solutions that cover database activity monitoring?
So database activity monitoring, yes, that is more of our DB Protect offering. So activity monitoring. So App Detective really is your tactical point-and-shoot time. I need to look at these vulnerabilities or these configuration settings. We call this database vulnerability assessment, but really vulnerabilities, what makes up a vulnerability is all security issues, right? Because security issues can lead to threats, and threats can lead to vulnerabilities. We just have it all there. But database activity monitoring is really our DB Protect solution, where we can help you look specifically real time at your data coming into the database and understanding either whatever you want to do. So if it's looking at all your audit transactions coming through, DML, DCL statements coming in, if it's specifically around identifying specific attack vectors, we can look at that as well. So that's something, if you're interested in, definitely give us a ring, and we'll be more than happy to discuss further what your needs are.
Great. We have two last questions. I think I heard you say that you supported Sybase 11.9.2. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. Last question. What is the impact of App Detective Pro on server load, or is App Detective Pro loaded on a separate server?
So App Detective Pro is loaded on a separate server. Does not get installed on the database server. It's a network port addressable product. So I have it here on my laptop. If I could ping your database server, and if again you give me an account for me to run the audit, I can go ahead and collect the data, close the connection to that database, and run all my analysis that I need to do based upon my policy back where my App Detective is.
Okay, great. We just have one last question that just came in, Mark, on about App Detective Pro and the license, the no-cost one-year license. Are there any restrictions on that?
So that's limited to a single. I guess the license type is a single database license type. So if you need to scan a single Oracle for 1 year, that's what it's locked down into. But if you have, again, the restrictions, if you want to call us in or give us an email, we'll have more than happy to have someone discuss with you.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. And again, it will be available. The session will be available within about 24 to 48 hours. So if you want to review this later, you can go ahead and do that. In the meantime, please, if you are interested in taking advantage of the offer, we do have this link that's up here right now. We'll leave this link up here. You can click on this link and download a version of App Detective Pro. And thanks again for everyone for attending.